Courtney poked her head out of the window of her second-floor bedroom. The neighborhood was still silent, under a haze of mist and a light drizzle. The streetlights illuminated the fog into a glowing ember orbs that hovered over above the streets and sidewalks. All the houses that lined the residential road were dark and still. Courtney placed one from her side room of the other. She waited impatiently for her parents to settle in and go into bed for the night. It was close to 11 before she finally heard heavy footfalls of feet going up the stairs to the master bedroom on the other side of the house. Slipping one leg out of the window, then another, Courtney carefully placed the tip of her toes on the bracket that secured the drainage pipe of the house. She was mindful that the light drizzle had coated everything, making it difficult to get a good grip of the slippery metal housing. The fit girl shimmed down the thin pipe with expertise and dropped into the ground at least 6 feet. She pulled her phone back to check the time. She had just enough time. Courtney calculated after a brisk jog to the subway station, 2 stops, and 1 fast-paced walk. She would make it with just enough time. The girl still couldn't believe she was going through all this trouble for a boy she barely knew. Courtney never did anything like this. She never lied to her parents or snuck out of the house in the middle of the night. In fact, it was usually the boy who did this kind of thing for her, not for the other way around. But there was something different about him. Whatever he was around her, she felt flustered. A slow burn emerged from her core, making her cheeks grow hot and caused her to stumble to her words. His aroma was nothing but intoxicating to her. She hungered for him. Yes, that was the most accurate description of her feelings towards him. She hungered for him. When she was next to him, nothing in the world was wrong. However, alone, Courtney would ponder the events and all wonder how they got to this point. She was always the careful and cautious type. This behavior was so out of character for her. She knew virtually nothing about him. She didn't know what school he went to or what he did in his free time. All she knew his name was Jarius, or Jai, to his friends. She also knew she was supposed to meet him tonight at the park bench on the east side of Bickthorn Field Park. Slightly out of breath, she descended to the stairs to the subway platform and waited for the train to arrive. The fluorescent lights flickered on and off erratically, casting a palish greenish blue glow over the walls, separating her inbound and outbound platforms that was 4-foot drop from the tracks, where laid and disappeared down a long dark tunnel. The platforms were deserted and deathly quiet, something not usual at this time of night, but still oddly enough left the girl with a feeling of emptiness and loneliness. Courtney poked her head over the edge and looked down at the tunnel, hoping that she could see the lights of an approaching train. A soft chuckle filled the empty terminal, startling her. She realized she wasn't alone. From the corner of her eye, she noticed a lone figure, sitting in the shadows. Not wanting to let the stranger know she saw him, Courtney kept to her head and turned in the direction of the tunnel. She turned and looked around and took a seat on the bench, keeping her head down. She did try to take a look at the strange man in the shadows. The man was sitting on the bench, slouched and arms stretched as wide as if he were watching television at home, with one leg crossed and placed on his knee. Courtney couldn't help but notice his clothes, what he was wearing. They seemed excessively baggy to the point of ridiculousness. The same could be said for his feet, which were abnormally large for an average person. Regardless of what the weirdo was wearing, she was almost sure that he was watching her intently from across the way. For a moment, he did not seem to move a muscle, and his stare remained unbroken. Slowly his head cocked to the side, and his hand slowly rose, swaying left to right, and waved a hello to the frightened girl. A gust of wind began to blow from the incoming train, pushing against the straight air from the tunnel. The faint whine grew louder as it approached. Courtney stood as she ignored the strange man, beckoning his greetings from across the way. The train flew by before it came to a slow stop. Flashes of light escaped through the train windows speeding by. From the far side of the platform, Courtney caught quick glimpses of the man, now standing and approaching the edge of this platform from the outbound side of the subway station. over the squeals of brakes grinding the massive machines to stop. She thought she heard someone laughing under his rumble and roar. The train finally came to a full stop, and Courtney tore her gaze away from the stranger. She quickly boarded the empty train and sat her back towards their new admirer. She didn't get a distinct look at him, but the girl remained unsettled by what she saw, or what she thought she saw. Her mind was already working to convince herself that she only had imagined it or was mistaken. Courtney's rational side was hard at work at convincing herself that she hadn't seen glimpses of the pastry white skin, the thick blue eyeliner, or the crimson red hair and nose all above else. It was a stare that the girl wanted to forget, the face that was burned into her memory, and no amount of denial would erase her mind. Engraved into the surface was forced expressions, bashfulness, and innocence. However, to Courtney, the appearance was cast as fake and artificial, most likely because the unique feeling was so foreign to alien it. It was the face of predator, alarming and playful demeanor, meant to trick and deceive its young and suspecting prey. Its mask convoyed a friendly look, with the single intent and desire to lure away, and all those who were so naive and unaware of such evil exists in the world today. Courtney shivered at the thought of the man roaming around at night on the empty train stations. He would have easily been on her side of the platform, waving only from a few feet away. As the train began to pull away, she slowly turned around and could only see the empty platform, though flickering lights. Rows of dirty and empty benches soon vanished into the distance as the train accelerated and sped away. Courtney sat alone in the train, feeling unnerved. The loud clanks and bangs of the train's wheels against the tracks rocked her back and forth, preventing her from relaxing. Her mind kept turning to that empty platform across the way, and that weird man slashed at the back in the shadows. Courtney still refused to believe what she had seen in those flashes of light. What would a man dressed up like a clown be doing in the subway station in the middle of the night? Like everyone else, she had heard the clown sightings. Everyone at school was talking about it, and it seemed like everyone knew someone who'd experienced a clown encounter. They told stories of near misses or chilling, nerve-rattling chases along the deserted hiking paths. Sometimes they just stare at you. They just stared. With time to spare, the train slowed at Courtney's stop. She waited impatiently for the doors to slide open. A bing ran over the intercom, and the monotone voice announced that they had arrived at her stop. The train slowed, and it took time before it entirely halted. The door slid open, and Courtney froze in place. As hard as she tried, she just could not deny what her eyes were showing her. Tied to a bench on the far end of the deserted terminal was a large crimson balloon. It floated nonchalantly in the air as if it belonged there. Printed on its surface were the big black letters that spelled "Bad Girl." Courtney raised up the stairs the farthest from the particular balloon left on the bench. The past events were too strange for her to ignore. Was it a message? Was it a warning? Was someone messing with her? Was someone after her? Courtney walked briskly along the deserted streets, mindful of her surroundings. She would frequently check over her shoulders at the sounds and the seconds of set footsteps. She imagined she heard from behind. She decided to cut through 50's First and Half Street and cross Grove to get to the park. Courtney stared down a long, dark alley and cursed herself for her current predicament. It was the type of alleyway she'd seen in goddamn horror movies, where you would find a goddamn body in the stupid girl who snuck out of her house in the middle of the goddamn night. Courtney began to walk down the alley. On the other side of the entrance to the park, and Jarrus, or Jay as he liked to be called, Courtney remained herself. She tried to avoid the puddles collected amongst the cracked and broken asphalt. A swoosh and fluttering from above startled her. She looked up, only to see the buildings vanish into the night. The drizzling had stopped, but the moisture hung in the thick air, and the streetlight gave the mist an amber glow to its hue. Courtney held her breath as she listened intently in the silence. She stood completely still until she heard the faint tip-tip-tap splash from behind. She turned to see the distant shape of a man standing in the entryway of the alleyway. He stood tall, rigid and still, staring at the lone girl. Courtney ran the remainder of the way to the park. She stopped to catch her breath and took her in the surroundings. Her situations hadn't improved very much. She was alone, in the middle of the night, a deserted park. A faint light illuminated the path. Branches of trees stretched upwards towards the night sky. She continued forward and collected her destination. Every once in a while the branches from above would rustle, as if some light and graceful was leaping from one tree limb to the next. Sometimes it was so close she could feel the air swoop and move in hairs next to her ears. Courtney had reached the end of her tolerance. She had enough and stomped her foot and yelled, "Listen, asshole! I have already had enough. My friend is just over there, and if you don't take off before I reach him, you're going to get an ass kicking you soon won't forget." Courtney turned to her heels, mumbling under her breath, "Asshole," as she marched towards the lone bench by the creek at the far side of the park. It wasn't long until she heard voices from around a bend. There were hops and hollers from young voices, seemingly having a good time. Under the orange and yellow glow from the park lights, she saw 4 figures underneath its illumination. One stood still with his arms crossed, staring off in the distance. Another 3 jumped off and on the park bench table, swinging from a light post, apparently entertaining each other on this dreary, dready night. As Courtney drew closer to the bench, the lone figure uncrossed his arms and looked up with a genuine delight and said, "Babe, you made it! I was beginning to worry you wouldn't show up." He took the girl and embraced her in his arms. He buried his face in her hair and inhaled deeply, saying, I missed you so much." Courtney took in the embrace, and the flood of the infatuation and emotions made her lightheaded and flustered. She lifted her eyes and saw the silhouettes of the 3 strangers watching the spectacle intently. They slowly drew closer with their heads slightly cocked to the side. The odd behavior was enough to clear her head momentarily. She pulled away from Ja and asked, "Who are they?" Ja gestured to her direction and dismissingly, "Oh, them. They're nobodies. They're family. Don't mind them." Courtney looked at the 3 figures and back to Ja and said, "I thought you said that it would be just you and me." The taller of the 3 strangers stepped forward and called, "Jarius!" He then spoke with the guttural language that Courtney could not identify. Jai responded with the same language, and all 4 of them began to laugh. Courtney pulled away and said, "This is not what I came all the way out here for. Do you know what I went through to get here? I had to climb out of my house and risk my life. Then I had to wait in the deserted subway station all by myself, with some creep making goo-goo eyes at me on the other side. I'm wet, I'm tired, and my hair's a mess. So if you excuse me, I'm a little pissed when I showed up and you're here chilling out with the Siberian stooges over there." Courtney turned to leave when she felt the firm grip on her arm pulled back to Ja's embrace. He whispered into her ear, "I'm terribly sorry, little Patlet. The truth of the matter is, we all have to endure these mild inconveniences for some time to spare. Perhaps this lesson should teach you of this every night." He laughed. The flood of emotions and the infatuation rushed over Courtney once again. She felt the heat burn in her cheeks and the build in her chest. Her sense stirred the feelings and threatened to overcome the rational thinking and any sense of self-preservation. Then for 1 second the spell was broken. It was a confusion that cleared minded thoughts. What a confusion from a word spoken to her. She turned and looked at Jarius in the eyes and asked, "What did you call me?" Jarius smiled and had his eyes clouded with red orbs and black, slitted pupils. The flesh from his face fell down in waves of clumps, revealing pale and leathery skin. Hooked claws rose from each side of his head, just under his ears. Loud ripping emerged from the bony appendages, tearing free from his back, revealing a large, translucent wings. He opened his mouth wide and long. Curved fangs broke into the surface and tore through the gums. He spoke with a gurgling voice with saliva and Belgium. "My dear, dear, delicious pellet. Yes, that is what you are. You look so tasty. I can't wait to eat you up." Courtney screamed as she pointed fangs lowered and pierced the surface of her skin. She closed her eyes and gritted her teeth as the pain grew. Jarvis's bite and Courtney's screams suddenly interrupted by the loud honking of a bicycle horn. Honk honk! The confusion fell before the predator and prey's face. Each looked at each other as if to ask, "Was it you?" They looked up to see a shape of a man standing before them. He was tall and fit. Baggy clothes he wore with the dingy white and yellow ruffles on the cuffs of his arms and feet. His hair was puffy and came to sharp points to each side of his head. His face was a pasty white with blue paint streaked across his cheeks and eyes like war paint. The tip of his nose was crimson red and his eyes were piercing blue. His large band was cocked back into a fervid, gloved fist. The swift and mighty blow landed precisely on the center of Jarvis's face. The punch knocked the creature off its feet and sent Courtney spiraling to the ground. Out from the darkness, two clowns flipped into view, from left and right to the other side of the taller companion. Each brandished silver daggers in hands. A petite female clown rushed to Courtney's side and gestured her the hands to say, "Stay put." She guarded the girl with a long twirling staff, clapped over the silver tips. Courtney watched in amazement as the four clowns engaged in four creatures, displaying incredible acts of acrobatics and skilled tactics of seasoned warriors. She gripped and gasped in surprise as the tall clown smashed her head into the attacking monster with oversized mallet. The creature body burst into flames, and the clowns moved one, coordinating their attacks and anticipating each other's moves to overcome the outmaneuver the physically superior beasts. Jarvis flew and approached upon the low-hanging tree, maliciously glared down, and one another of its brothers fell into the skills of their enemy. It scanned the scene and smiled when it saw Courtney cowering on the ground, and decided that tonight might not be a total loss. It leapt down, landing beside her, and took a hold of her long wet hair. With a sudden whoosh, it was a hand separated from its wrist. A glint of silver boomerang sparkled, as if returned to the palm of the smaller female clown. Courtney stumbled backwards, slamming hard into a tree as the darkness of the unconsciousness slowly bled her vision. She then saw the four figures quickly surrounded the nightmarish shape. They stabbed and jabbed the creature as it burst into flames, and Courtney saw no more. Courtney opened her eyes. Her blurry vision was slow to clear, but eventually it did. She soon realized she was back in her bedroom. Of course she was not fooled. She was not going crazy. No, it hadn't been just a dream. She then still felt the chill from the damp clothes she wore. She felt the gigantic lump in the back of her head from where she had collided with the tree. She could still feel the sting from the two puncture marks along the side of her neck. Most importantly, she could see the giant crimson balloon bobbing in the air with big black letters that spelled, "Good girl." What's up, my pretties? It's the Lion Queen here. I want to appreciate you all for tuning into this video, and I do appreciate you guys supporting my video by giving this video likes and stuff. If you really enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe if you're new, ring the bell for notifications to when I upload so that way you guys will get updated for whenever I upload. If you want to follow me on Twitter or DeviantArt, feel free to leave a follow on those if you are interested in following me on those socials. If you want to support my backup channel, known as Miss Dark Shigo, feel free to subscribe to it, as a link to that will also be in the About page section. And with that being said, and that being the case, thank you so much for watching, my pretties, and as always, stay pretty.